Good evening. I'd like to call the Monday, February 12th, 2018 Eden Prairie Planning Commission meeting to order. Would everyone please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. Okay, first item on our agenda is the approval of our agenda this evening. Does anybody have any comment on the agenda? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Move approved.
Second.
Motion to approve and second has been made. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Second item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes. This goes way back to Monday, December 11th, 2017. Everybody should have received a copy of those unapproved minutes. Does anybody have any questions or comments on those minutes from December 11th? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve the minutes for December 11th, 2017.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. I don't believe we have any informational meetings tonight, nor do we have any public meetings, but we do have one public hearing. We do have a public hearing for the Preserve Village Retail Building, Jerry's Foods, request for planned unit development concept review on 9.10 acres, planned unit development district review with waivers on 9.10 acres, site plan review on 9.10 acres, and preliminary plat of one outlot into one lot on 9.10 acres. What I'd like to do is ask staff to run through a staff report. The commissioners will have some opportunities to ask some questions if need be, and then we'll ask the applicant to come up and give a short presentation if you'd like. We may ask some questions of you, and we will have open mic for the public if there's any public comment for questions and answers. Then we'll deliberate. So with that, Julie, can you run us through the staff report, please?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, as stated, this is a request for PUD review with waivers as well as site plan and preliminary plat. The property is currently platted as an outlot, and the request for preliminary plat is to plat it into a typical lot and block. The development proposal in front of you this evening is essentially to build a freestanding building in the Jerry's Foods parking lot. It could house up to 3 tenants. At this point, a Starbucks is proposed on the north end of the building, along with a drive-through facility. The remaining square footage of that building has not been designated for a particular user. It could be a single user, could be 2 individual users, depending on who the developer works with to fill that spot. The property the proposed development plan does meet the tree replacement and landscape requirements. It also does meet the exterior building materials and architecture requirements of the city code. As part of the PUD process, the applicant is requesting several waivers. One of those waivers is with regard to parking stalls. So right now, the site in its current condition provides more parking stalls than is required by code. With the removal of some of those parking stalls to house the new building, but also an additional need for parking to support the new building, ultimately the proposal ends up a little bit shy of what the city code requires. So the parking analysis is included in your staff report. As you can tell from that information, parking requirements by city code for retail uses are based on number of stalls per gross square footage of floor area. For restaurants, parking requirements are calculated based on number of seats in the restaurant area. So staff has been in conversation with the applicant to understand that because we don't know who may fill out the remainder of that space. We did have some conversation with the developer about language in the development agreement, similar to what we've seen at Eden Prairie Retail, which is the store that was recently constructed where Famous Dave's was. and then also the shops at Southwest Station, the former Santorini site, where language was built into those development agreements, acknowledging the amount of parking necessary for retail, and if a restaurant use came in, that they would have to go through a process to make sure that they can park adequately. In this particular case, the development team would like to preserve some opportunity to provide restaurant uses. So staff is confident that there's a way to craft that language in the development agreement that talks about retail would allow this many parking stalls. Based on that, a restaurant with a certain number of seats would be permissible. Anything beyond that would need to have some type of review to ensure that there's adequate parking. Also, in this case, it's a little bit different than the previous two because there's not an abundance of restaurants down there, all competing for spaces at peak hours. So taking that into account as well. Another item worth noting is that the site currently has a non-conforming use of a garden center that occurs out there. Because of the parking waiver that's being requested, the applicant is agreeable to discontinuing that non-conforming use in order to maintain the appropriate amount of parking. If the waiver for parking were to be granted, the overall site would park at roughly 4.5 spots for every 1,000 square feet of floor area, which is consistent with other large retail tenant spaces within Eden Prairie, the mall, other bigger shopping centers as well. The other waiver that is being requested is with regard to signage. So city code would allow 2 freestanding signs because it has 2 street frontages. If I have my memory serves me correctly, it would be 80 square feet on one frontage, 36 square feet on another. They are proposing that rather than having 2 signs at that total square footage, they'd have a single sign at that square footage. And again, that is a similar waiver to what was approved not only at the Jerry's building on their wall signage, but other retail sites as well, because it still meets the overall intent and area allowed for signage. The developer did conduct a neighborhood meeting back in December, and there were a handful of folks that did attend that as well. They've made their information available so that residents could email them and contact them with questions, and they have gotten some outreach from residents in order to clarify any questions that they may have had. Staff is recommending approval of the development proposal that you have in front of you, subject to the conditions outlined in your staff report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have or defer them to other people.
Thank you, Julie. We may, before moving on to the applicant's presentation, I have 2 quick ones. What happens to the bus stop park and ride people who use the lot now? I read in the staff report that use is going away, or that agreement's gone away, but there are still cars parking there, and the bus stop, I think signs may still be there.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, when the application came in, it was communicated to city staff that there was an agreement between the property owner and Southwest Transit to reserve, I believe, it was 40 spots on that site. There was a parking study that was done as well, which showed that far less than 40 spots were used for that park and ride. In our outreach with Southwest Transit informed us that that agreement is no longer in place. As to why, I can't speak to. If it just kind of slipped by the wayside and wasn't renewed, I can't give the history on that. But the applicant has indicated that they would expect, because there's ample parking space there, that the spaces could still be used for parking for that bus stop. And further conversation with Southwest Transit would have to occur to solidify or memorialize an agreement if that is what both parties chose to do.
Okay, thank you. And then going back to the topic you said about the 2 vacant uses in the new building being designated for non-restaurant use per your discussion, is there a reason why you excluded the what will be vacant Starbucks restaurant from the main building from that list of suites that shouldn't become a restaurant?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the application this evening is focused on the new building rather than the existing building. No changes are proposed to that building. The changes to the site plan include the construction of the new building, so that is where we were focusing our resources.
Okay, but the math for the parking counts used that old Starbucks suite as retail, not restaurant.
Starbucks would be calculated as a restaurant use rather than a retail use.
In the new building, but I mean in the old building, when they move out of their suite in the main building, the parking calculations that were done calculate that old building only for restaurant use for the Brugger's and the
Correct.
Subway.
Correct. I
So that-
apologize, I misunderstood your
That's
question.
okay, that's okay.
Yep. So, and the tenant mix could change out there tomorrow if new lease space is
Sure.
occupied. So that's why staff is comfortable with the waiver as it's proposed, because it allows us an opportunity to monitor and keep an eye on any parking needs through an additional process should there be a user coming in requiring more parking than what's available by code.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions of staff before we move on to the applicant's presentation? Okay, hearing none. Would the applicant like to step forward and please give us your name and address?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. My name is Brady Busselman. I'm a civil engineer with Sambatech. Address 14800 Whitewater Drive, North Suite 300, Minnetonka.
Speak into the microphone.
please.
Pardon me.
That's all right.
All right. Address is 12800 Whitewater Drive North, Suite 200, Minnetonka.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mike Jutz with Jerry's Enterprises, and my address, business address is 5101 Vernon Avenue, Edina, 55436.
Thank you.
There we go. So that was a great, thorough presentation by Julie, so I'll try to make this as painless as possible, but I am an engineer, so I might get into the weeds a little bit. Looking at the existing conditions out there, the site is currently occupied by an 80,000 square foot mall and a large, you could call it a sea of parking to the east. The parking ratio currently out there is about 5.6 stalls per 1,000 square feet. For reference, I've worked throughout my career with Walmart as a client, and up until 5 years ago, they were very strict about no less than 5 stalls per 1,000 square feet. In the last 5 years, they've flipped and said no more than 4 stalls per 1,000 square feet. So that kind of gives you a frame of reference as to how overparked we are. We're at 5.6. A major retailer such as Walmart desires 4.0. Additionally, the existing Starbucks located in the center does not have an opportunity for a drive-through, which is very, very important to their business. So by locating this building on the east side between the 2 existing driveways, east side of the existing parking lot, we're able to provide a drive-through by utilizing some of that unused parking area. Couple quick notes. Ponding for the site would be provided directly east of the building, and we've had some discussion back and forth both with city staff and the watershed, and we're confident that this will meet watershed requirements. The new sign location, I'm not sure if I have a pointer here, but it would be directly north of the proposed building, still on Hennepin Town Road, just south of the north entrance. You can see the contours there from some regrading we would do to get the sign at a good elevated elevation along that roadway. I had some notes, but Julie did such a good job, I don't really need to revisit a lot of these, which is great. I'll flip ahead here to the building elevations, and unfortunately the architect couldn't be with us tonight. We'll do our best here to answer any questions you might have. I can say generally that the majority of the building is brick and glass with a small amount of EFS. With that, I don't know, Mike, if you have anything to add.
On the architecture, the brick would be designed to match the existing center. EFS color would be to blend in with, or probably the same as the existing center. So we want it to look very similar, like it was meant to be there. Other than the, and in fact, even the black canopies went on to the exterior remodel that we did a couple of years ago. So we're trying to carry that all the way through.
Great, and with that, we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
That'd be great. Maybe stick around close to the podium as we maybe fire some off to you and think we're all looking forward to the upgrading going on at the remodeling inside Jerry's Foods also, so that's great that you're reinvesting in the community for us. I'm going to just start with some general questions. Could one of you elaborate maybe on the neighborhood meeting? It doesn't sound like there were very many participants, but could you summarize any particularly positive or negative comments and how you're addressing any of those concerns for us, please?
I think we had 7 or 8 individuals stop by or sign in. I'd have to say it was overwhelmingly positive, and it's interesting that almost all of them said, well, I hope you put food use out there. So they all want more choices of food. So there was one couple that followed back up with us on some building signage questions that lives just adjacent to the south. I think we answered their question. So.
Okay. Thank you. As long as we have the engineer near the podium, maybe we could just elaborate a little bit on that storm sewer design. I was a little surprised to see that you're capturing most of the rainwater coming off the main parking lot before it gets to your new filtration feature. And you're just taking the roof water from the new building and a little bit of ground space area and pushing it into your new filtration area. The new roof water will be really clean, and so instead of doing that, wouldn't it be better to take that surface area from the parking lot where you get the grease, oil, and contamination and treat that instead?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That is a good question. So we are not taking the majority of the parking lot runoff. There's still a significant area that's not being touched by this project that is not required to be treated by the watershed rules and city rules. So what we're taking is a slightly larger area than we're disturbing, so we're over-treating. But the more area that you take to a BMP requires a best management practice. A pond would require a larger area to treat it to the correct standards. So we're getting by the skin of our teeth with slightly over the amount that's required. So trying to direct more there and reroute it there gets to be a little tricky. Is that helping?
Yeah, I was just wondering how the areas that you are treating got prioritized above some of the areas that you chose not to treat. Some stormwater is coming in from your southern neighbor also, and I don't know if that's been pre-treated or not, but I was just trying to make sure that the areas that you do treat are potentially some of the most contaminated, if you will, and I don't suggest that there's contamination on your site. You understand just the engineering term of it.
Right.
So you saw where I was going with that?
Certainly. I guess to answer your question, simply the idea is to prioritize those areas that are disturbed and reconstructed, and in addition to that, so that sets the threshold of the area that we need to treat. The other factor is conveying it to this best management practice. We have a couple constraints that we need to deal with infiltration. We need to keep the bottom of the feature 3 feet above the water table, and there was some water identified pretty close to that here. And then that sets the bottom, and then the city also requires that our high water level not come within, I want to say, and I might be off, but it's something like 2 feet of the overflow to the roadway. So we're really squeezed on the amount of area that we can put in there. So to bring something from further away requires typically a deeper pipe. So we could be getting into the issues getting close to groundwater because the pipe needs to fall as it gravity drains from further away. So that was part of the issue. And then, as I mentioned before, adding additional runoff would hamper the function of the BMP. So what we wound up doing here is continue to bypass the stormwater coming from the area to the south and from the majority of the existing parking lot. There are a couple of low points in the parking lot near where we're working that will get picked up as part of this project, but it really is a relatively minor area. And that just makes it a cleaner exercise. The other thing, and you're correct about the roof runoff being cleaner, the benefit to that is it's not going to clog up an infiltration BMP as quickly as some of the grittier parking lot runoff would. Now, we pre-treat that, and we are pre-treating it, but you can only do so much. So we do actually like to have that clean roof runoff that gets directed into the infiltration basin.
Okay, all right. One more question before I open it up to others. Have you made your absolute best efforts to save those 2 significant trees there in the parkway? It seems like just by adding some short segmental retaining wall underneath their drip line near your BMP feature, those trees could be saved. There's only about 2.5 feet of grade differential there, and you know, if you were to kind of go into that drain tiled area just a little bit around each tree, it just looks like those are savable.
We, as I mentioned, are very, very tight, as I said, getting by the skin of our teeth. I don't know if there's an opportunity to swap out, save the trees, and grade a little bit in the city right-of-way. I think we'd be willing to entertain that. When you get into the large root zones of these bigger trees, you know, the width of the canopy, we probably have to look at putting the retaining wall around that, at which point there's a good chance this narrow pond would be cut off.
Sure, okay.
So
I might just charge you to take a second look at that and work with staff in the
Sure.
future. Commissioners, do you have any questions of the applicant before we let him sit down?
I'll just make a comment. I take it from what you all have just exchanged that the idea of a rain garden doesn't work here at all, from the way things are.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. This will be it'll be an infiltration basin. A rain garden really is an infiltration basin. There will be vegetation in this. It is tricky because of the soil types here to really get good infiltration through. And part of what you need for rain gardens is just the right depth of water for just the right amount of time and just the right plants and just the right conditions. So it will be a vegetated area. Whether or not you call it a rain garden, I guess, depends on
What you have to work with.
and what you consider a garden.
Okay, thank you.
What is the substrate of the soil underneath that parking lot? Was there a swamp there at one point?
So I don't believe it's highly organic. There are type D clay soils in the area.
Okay.
That's why I mentioned it's very difficult to get infiltration through here. And Riley Purgatory Bluff Creek is one of the few watersheds that will say you need to get that water in the ground through the clay. So that's one of the challenges with this infiltration basin. I don't believe we have any structural issues that would be related to organics like a swamp.
Okay.
I'd just like to interject something. I'm quite familiar with that property. One thing I want to state is that I want to hats off to Jerry's for the tremendous investment in our community. You have a long time business partner with the city, and it's very much appreciated. Question that I have is, when I'm looking at the Starbucks, I'm looking at the drive-through, and I'm sitting looking at how you have the building situated, just my own information here as far as how tight a turn is that when you come off the drive? Because I know, like, you're coming down off of Anderson Lake, and then basically where the building's sitting, how much clearance is there in there?
So are you referring to getting in and from the north?
Right, from
driveway?
It would be, right. It would be the north is where I'm thinking as far as where you're coming down off of Anderson.
Mm-hmm. Well, so the main entrances to Hennepin Town Road are not changing. So that turn is what it is today.
Okay.
And then you're taking 90-degree turns on 25 feet wide drive aisles, which is standard for a parking lot. So we're pretty comfortable.
You're feeling really good about it.
Yeah, that the
That's
maneuver
just
is
what I'm
going to
getting
be-
at. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Any other questions of the applicant? Commissioners?
Given that conversation, one of the thoughts that occurred to me as I was looking at the map was problems that have occurred with other drive-throughs for coffee shops in the city, and wondering if you have thought about that and the possibility that folks will be really enthused about having the coffee shop and want to get there in the morning. And that the cars will stack up. So have you talked about stacking issues and whether or not there's something that you've already resolved, or if you've thought about how you're going to think about that?
Sure. And yes, there were discussions around. We felt comfortable with our initial design. I believe it provided for over 10 cars for stacking. And I don't know if we could get the site plan back up. Otherwise, I'll try to describe it. So if you look at the southeast corner of the building, you'll see that there's parking straight across now where the south entrance is.
Yeah.
It formerly was more like the north entrance where you could immediately take a right. And the purpose of that, with working with staff, was to prevent cars from backing up, blocking the access to Hennepin Town Road. Now they'll have to wrap around, and they'll get us some extra stacking and divert it away from the public roadway. So,
Thank you.
yes, good call.
Good thinking.
With these improvements, and I understand you're going to do away with the seasonal sales and the Christmas tree sales. Are you going to have to haul snow away? Are you prepared to haul snow away? Because I noticed there might be a dozen or 20 stalls now that are covered by snow piles with our weather. And so with parking, which is going to be, I don't want to say at a premium, but you're going to have a lot more demand on your parking. I think you're going to have to be prepared to haul snow away potentially.
We've honestly not thought through snow removal. Snow removal is extremely expensive.
Right.
And we have a significant green space on the south of the site and west. And our thought, now it doesn't matter. We have so much parking, it doesn't matter.
Right.
But in the future, our hope would be that, and our plan would be that we would push it further onto these green spaces. We have them available, so that would be the plan.
Okay, great. Just make sure that your snowplower knows that so that we can have every available space available 12 months a year. Commissioner Whitkey.
I think I will ask a question, and this might be combined staff and proponent. They were talking about the drive-through, and as I just looked at it, I was seeing the drive lanes on southbound traffic coming off of Anderson Lakes Parkway and that curve that comes around, and then the drive-through itself, I'm assuming, is a northbound drive-through lane. And you've got one tree that is mitigating light shed from the drive-through, the parked drive-through vehicles on site from being impeded on the southbound traffic during a nighttime or non-daytime operations. And I'm curious to know if that conversation came up on a staff level during within the Development Review Committee, or if that conversation came up on your guys' staff level, because it could become, just because of the nature of the roadway itself and the slowing down of a straight-through lane, which would otherwise is a bypass for 169, and the southbound traffic, they're coming to a head right there. And then you've got, on the opposite side of the southbound traffic, another north lighted lane. And so what kind of measures are you addressing that light shed?
Sure. Thank you. Good question. So there are a number of shrubs proposed there, and I'll let staff weigh in as well. So those shrubs work well to get into that 3 foot or so headlight height. So north.
So the shrubs are going to be at least minimum 3 feet high from there? Because I think that is a lower spot. Or am I reading it backwards? Where's the elevation?
So the drive-through, I believe, is pretty consistent elevation, just due to its proximity to the building. There's not room for a lot of variation. The other mitigating factor is that there's quite a hill coming down Hennepin Town Road, so not saying that the screening won't help, but you also have the benefit of not being in the direct line of headlight glare from the north-facing drive-through traffic.
It'll just be a unique feature as people driving aren't used to seeing headlights on their right side. So that's why I'm just asking you.
Sure. No,
from a public safety standpoint.
That is a good question, and we feel comfortable with the shrubs. We're willing to work with staff, though, if they have further input on that.
Staff have anything to add to that?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the landscaping plan that is a part of your packet does show that there would be shrubs all along the east side of that drive-through as traffic heads north in that drive-through lane before it turns to the west. So staff is comfortable based on the type of species that are proposed that it will adequately screen. That does meet code requirement for screening of parking or drive aisle areas adjacent to differing land uses or roadways.
Thank you.
Okay. Speaking of lighting, good segue. 2 or 3 light poles in the parking lot have to get relocated or rebuilt. And I noticed that the city went through down Hennepin Town Line already and changed all their luminaires in front of your site from HID to LED. And your parking lot still has the old HID fixtures. With all the upgrades you're doing inside the store and with this new structure, might you be in line for some energy-saving LED fixtures in the parking lot?
Yes, thank you for that question. In fact, I was reviewing a proposal today on replacing the poles and light fixtures with LED throughout the entire parking lot, and actually responded back to the electrical company that said, oh, wait, I want to do all the building packs all the way around as well, so they're revising that. So I would like to do that as part of this project, is to go LED.
That's great. Good energy-saving move. Okay, thank you. Okay, this is a public hearing. Does anybody from the audience wish to address the commission? If so, would you come forward, please, to the podium? You could state your name and address for us.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Chair and the members of the council. My name is Stephen Barts, and I live on 9259 Amsden Way. And we live in the community, the preserve community, right behind Jerry's. And my wife and I were just mentioning, we do welcome this added addition to the community too in our neighborhood. I think it will be a great thing. And also the improvements to Jerry's. I've been bumping into a lot of the Jerry's employees at Cub, and they all seem very happy to, they're looking forward to it. Living in the preserve has a lot of benefits, and it's kind of a shameless plug here, but it's a very walkable community. And if you would put it on a score of any neighborhood in Eden Prairie, I would argue it may be one of the highest. We can, within walking distance of banking, buying groceries, having a cup of coffee, lots of things, so we do appreciate that. My big concern is just we're an active family. I apologize to the 2 gentlemen. We were not able to make it to the I should say the neighborhood meeting, but we do a lot of walking. I have a dog. We walk our dog. That's often a sidewalk frontage on Hennepin Town Road that we do frequent quite a bit. And I also, as Councilman Weber may know, I have 2 twin daughters that enjoy a Starbucks oftentimes. So I guess my biggest question would be, was there any research or things done to project the increase in traffic going in and out of the Jerry's parking lot? And any efforts to be done to sustain the walkability of that area, whether that be with increased signage for pedestrians. My biggest concern, I guess, is people getting their morning coffee, We're pretty spaced out. You're in and out of this place. You want your caffeine. That's just probably my biggest concern, and how is that going to be marked off? Because as it is now, as I'm walking my dog or biking through that whole area, being a pedestrian is kind of taking life into your own hands at times in that area. So I would just appreciate any comments that the gentlemen have regarding how they would preserve the walkability and the safety of everyone in the preserved community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barts. Before we answer those questions, is there anybody else from the audience that would like to speak? Seeing none, okay, thank you. Well, so there was that question on walkability, safety, and I believe even touching on some traffic concerns. Staff, I think I'll let you maybe summarize what was in the traffic study. There was a professional traffic study done for the project, looking at the additional number of trips and whether that met safety thresholds for vehicular traffic. In the staff report, there are comments about the walkability of the project, recognizing the perimeter sidewalk for your neighborhood use, of course, and but I think there ought to be some dialogue on the paint-striped walkway between the main retail building and this outbuilding. I don't believe there was a new sidewalk proposed from the Hennepin Town Road sidewalk to the new building, just a few feet away. I believe you have to walk through the parking lot to get to the front door, and I don't know if that's what you were alluding to there. When you walk out of Starbucks or any one of those 3 retail stores and you want to go back into your neighborhood, I believe you have to walk through the parking lot to get back to Hennepin Town Road's sidewalk. If you would come back up to the podium if you want to say anything, please. Thank you.
I think my concern would be with the Hennepin Town Road and entrances and exits leading into the parking lot. There are, I think, 2. Are there 2?
Yes.
There, and I honestly, I mean, I'm just thinking either increased signage or striping on those intersections. I think there's going to be incredibly increased amount of traffic leading in and out there. For pedestrians just walking, I feel safe. We access the complex from the back, from what would be the back of Jerry's through the trail through the neighborhood. But
okay.
I do frequent that sidewalk quite often on the Hennepin Town Road.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barts. Mr. Root, could you comment on the applicability of maybe a painted crosswalk across the 2 driveway curb cuts on Hennepin Town Road and/or stop signs leaving private property onto Hennepin Town Road for the vehicles?
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, kind of address a couple things that were brought up. One is the traffic. The traffic study that was done for this site indicated about 1,900 new driveway trips. So driveway trips going in and out of that site. 200 and...
Sorry, could you give us the unit? Is that per hour, per day, per month?
Per day, per average weekday. And then part of that is the AM peak hour. It's about 233 new driveway trips estimated, and 110 about driveway trips in the PM peak hour. They also indicate, the traffic study also indicated that most of that was pass-by traffic, so traffic that's probably already on that road just happened to turn, they would turn in for that additional uses of the Starbucks as well as those other retail sites or uses. Regarding Hennepin Town Road Trail, that would be maintained. We typically don't put crosswalks in on those side streets, just because it's a fairly common practice. There's a lot of those all throughout the town, and years past we used to do it on intersections to county roads, and we kind of got away from that practice as well. I think you mentioned the stop sign. The stop sign on the parking lot coming out would be the responsibility of the property owner to provide that and maintain that. I think I answered your questions.
I think you did. Thank you very much. Would the stop sign, if it's not there already, be a recommended improvement?
Yes, that would be a recommended traffic control.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Might be warranted for the applicant to come back up and address that issue then?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, as far as stop signs go, I believe that they are in place. I'd certainly be willing to add them to the plans if not. Regarding striping, I'm not sure if the city's preference is to avoid it due to it not being consistently applied across private driveways. I think we can accommodate it either way, depending on the preference.
Is the driveway extraordinarily wide? In other words, wider than a normal driveway, 28 feet or something like that, that would cause a longer duration for a pedestrian to be in the driveway as they're crossing? Or is it of normal width?
They're not scaled, but it appears to be fairly normal width. It looks like it's probably about the drive aisle width,
Yeah.
which is
Pretty
25
normal.
feet or so.
Okay, okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, so no one else. Commissioners, let's see what you all have to say. Anybody have any general comments or further questions of staff or any other deliberatory comments?
I'll speak up.
Commissioner Kirk?
In general, I think this is a fairly well thought out. I'm a regular patron of this shopping center, so I'm familiar with it, and just, you know, my mind's eye picturing this out there, I think it works. I think the statistics we've heard on the parking spaces say that, you know, again, we're not building something where nobody can park. I think there should be, seems there should be enough room, and again, I appreciate, as others have said, the investment in the community, and I think this is a good addition to that corner of Eden Prairie, and I'm sure Starbucks will like it, and I'm sure all the caffeine-starved drivers will love it. So, looks like a good plan to me.
Good. Okay, we're looking good. All right, I have a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
I have a motion to, in a second, to close the public hearing. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Anyone abstaining?
Abstain? Oh, wait, I'll say aye for the closing of the public hearing, sorry. I'll abstain for the next one.
Okay, all right. Any more discussion? Commissioner Weber?
I'd move to recommend approval of the Preserve Village Retail Building Jerry's Food Project based on the plans stamped dated February 5th, 2018. Staff recommendations, the conditions contained in the staff report and its attachments dated February 8th, 2018.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Anyone abstaining?
I'm going to have to abstain due to a previous working relationship with the developer.
Okay, Commissioner Freiberg is abstaining.
I will abstain as well.
Okay, Commissioner Woodke is abstaining. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 ayes, 2 abstaining, and nobody nay. Motion passes.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, good luck with the project.
Yep.
Really looking forward to it. Okay, next on our agenda is the planner's report, talking about a 2018 meeting schedule. Julie?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, included in your packet for your review is the 2018 Planning Commission schedule. Typically, the Planning Commission meets the second and fourth Mondays of the month. I did include the schedule for you because we do have a couple of unique situations. In May, we will meet the fourth Tuesday of the month because it falls on Memorial Day, our regularly scheduled meeting. And then in November, we will have one meeting. We've kind of split the difference between the second and the fourth Mondays in order to avoid that Monday after Thanksgiving, which is just not a really great day to have a public hearing, and still have our regularly scheduled meeting while taking into account Election Day and Veterans Day, because all of those kind of tinker with our schedule a little bit. So please put those on your calendar. We will send out reminders as they get closer, but please put those on your calendar so that you're aware.
Thank you. Do we have any members' reports this evening? Continuing business? I don't believe we have any. Any new business?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I think I was wanting to place this as a new business as opposed to under the public hearing because it was a couple of comments that came up on the parking and something that came to mind in when I was just listening to the discussion on parking. And is there any follow-up by city staff or any department within the city that monitors the effective nature of projects that come forward that request waivers for parking stall requirements, and then seeing if the waivers themselves, the deviation from our standard, are working properly? Is there what kind of follow-up measures and what kind of metrics do we use on a city level, government level, to monitor that?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, when waivers are requested, be it for parking stall count or parking stall dimensions, drive aisles, because both are fairly typical, certainly city staff monitors those sites once they're constructed. We keep an eye out and an ear out for any complaints. As staff members, typically we will also visit the sites to make sure that they are working correctly. And certainly as we convene as a development review committee weekly, are there any issues should there be any issues that come up, those are shared with the broader development discussion team, which includes, safety folks, police, fire, engineering, building, planning, all of the pertinent divisions are represented there. So we do keep an eye on that. We do monitor to know if they're causing any problems. Typically, we would also hear from residents or consumers that may be having any issues out there. If we're starting to hear about that, we certainly follow up and take note of that for other projects as well. If you're asking if there's a specific process and procedure that is followed, it is certainly something that staff monitors and keeps an eye on.
So would it be fair to say that during the normal business hours, staff is actively monitoring, and then outside of business hours, like the peak time, the AM peak time, for instance, on this project of this caliber, the AM peak time for coffee, and then restaurant use would be a PM peak time, which would be outside the normal business hours that staff would be looking at. That is more on a police and a fire and a complaint-based
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I believe it's fair to say that a good number of those staff members that participate in the Development Review Committee do certainly participate or visit sites outside of regular business hours as well. Certainly, I know in my personal life, should I visit a restaurant in town, I take notice of certain things, as do my colleagues. So I wouldn't frame it so much as it's a business hours, non-business hours issue. We certainly have reason to be out in the community at all times of the day, but we also do rely on other departments as well who may be getting certain calls out to the site that we would be aware of. Certainly also through our social media and online outreach through Nextdoor, Facebook, all of the City Connect, all of those issues. We certainly hear about if there are concerns or problems out in the community. The See-Click Fix is another example of where we might get some feedback from residents or consumers at those sites.
You went right down where I was leading. So thank you. So the See-Click Fix is another good venue for this opportunity for the public to put forth in a very expedient and very cost-effective manner, and then it would be pooled together and then analyzed and staff. Thank you.
Yep.
Maybe just an add-on, Commissioner Woodkey, since everybody here is so tech-savvy with that C-click fix, I was really impressed with the Aspire 2040 interface on the web, where people could put pins and notes next to anywhere on the map of Eden Prairie and make a comment on a number of different layers of concern. And if that technology has a way of carrying forward beyond our Aspire 2040 effort, I think that would be a great citizen participation opportunity. Such a great graphic user interface and relatively easy to navigate. I thought that was a tremendous effort. Anybody else under the new business category? Commissioner DeSanctis?
I had a question, a follow-up to this development. What provisions were made for specification of waste, paper waste, and other product waste from the drive-through? So what kind of standard was put forth, or is there an expectation that the developer will create a stable type of garbage receptacle that will not be vulnerable to blowing away in the wind, that will not create a pollution nuisance or a litter nuisance?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that is not an item that city code regulates. So the site will require, of course, to have a trash enclosure. Any trash that is collected on the Starbucks site will be, of course, transported to that enclosure. Now, being a consumer at coffee shops, I'm not going to name names, but being a consumer, certainly it is regular or typical to have a trash container somewhere along that drive-through where you can deposit garbage. And I have never seen one of those in a drive-through that is not secured. So I would expect that it is something that the property owner would manage and maintain, and that would be their responsibility.
Just as a follow-up to that, from a trash standpoint, that's a pretty large parking lot. Thank you for bringing that up. When you're around Eden Prairie and other communities, when you see very large parking lots with specific westerly winds coming through, the trash that I've noticed are the leaflet flyers mostly coming out of grocery carts or shopping carts.
Yep.
And that, I mean, I'm not necessarily sure how any agency or any private homeowner or private interest owner can regulate somebody's lack of throwing away their own trash. So it's a difficult thing. I mean, the only thing that I've seen that has effectively somewhat worked is catching it through a chain link fence.
Sure.
But that's unsightly. So.
Sure. And that could be maybe handled through some litter enforcement, potentially, on a complaint-based.
There's also a little bit of a self-correcting there,
Yes.
because if a commercial facility is a trashy one, then it's probably not going to attract as many consumers into that facility. So hopefully there's a little bit of self-correcting there for the facility owner to take action to minimize, or at minimum clean it up, and a better find some preventive methods.
My gut feeling also would be, if you're looking at a franchise, there's an expectation of the franchise holder. I've never really been into for instance, in this case, Starbucks, that ever look cluttered. I mean, there's a neatness to the franchise system, that they offer. So I'm feeling pretty good about it.
Yeah, good. Do you have enough there, Julie, to write a refuse zoning code chapter for us on that?
That direction?
No, just good discussion. Just good discussion.
Just checking.
Getting late.
Checking.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.